everybody. Sorry for the slight delay. Lots of technical issues. Got two guests who are living in the middle of nowhere. So their internet can be a little bit patchy. But hopefully we're going to be okay. I am Dr. Chloe Farrar of Aucademy, and today we are covering autistic sensory needs and differences in profiles, and the importance of stimming, basically. So autistic sensory stimming, and we're going to talk about and also have a demonstration on forms of autistic relaxation. And how they might be different to typical relaxation expectation, things like mindfulness and meditation. Why might that not work for us? Actually, might be something we might talk about. So in terms of myself, as I said, Dr. Chloe Farrar, I am a shaved headed person with giant glasses, and today I'm wearing my Rolling Stones jumper, sitting in my office, and I'm joined by Monique and Annette. So Monique Craine, if you wouldn't mind doing a physical description.
Hi, I'm middle-aged 50-odd-year-old whitening long hair person, black t-shirt and a multicolour scarf.
Lovely. And you always forget the glasses and the headset.
The headset and the glasses, I do indeed.
I say every time, like the one other time we've had to do a physical description. And Annette Foster.
Yeah, and I'm Annette, and I'm a blonde, long-haired, blue-eyed person with a white jumper on in a very kind of beigey, boring room.
You're always going about the boring room. So like I say, we're talking about autistic sensory and sensory needs and profiles and so on, stimming and like I say, relaxation to some extent with Annette and Monique today. As usual, we start with our bog standard questions, which are: who are you and what are your dedicated interests? So I'll start with Annette this time, if that's all right. So Annette, who are you? I know we know you're Annette, but yeah. What are your interests? What interests you?
Well, I've just finished a PhD. Basically, I would say it was in autistic cultural studies and performance and visual art. Basically looking at the experience of autistic women, non-binary and trans people's experience of being autistic through visual art and performance. So I think probably autistic cultural studies is one of my main interests, as well as dance. I love tango right now. I take tango dancing classes. And what else is my main into? Art. Art just in general. Anything to do with art, and I'm happy.
Fantastic. Lovely. And Monique, who are you and what are your dedicated interests? I know we did this last week.
I've completely forgotten everything about me because I'm so keen to read your research, and that sounds absolutely fascinating. Sorry. So, who am I? I deliver training on neurodiversity, not just autism, all aspects of neurodiversity for workplaces. But I also do quite a lot of coaching for people who are recently diagnosed. So it's mainly adults who have been told that they're autistic and then received no other support whatsoever, and are trying to learn more about themselves. So we do a lot of coaching on how to cope with, when you have executive functioning difficulties, and sensory issues is a really, really big one, because I find that a lot of the clients that because they're identified autistic as adults, they've spent a long time suppressing their stims because they've been told that they're inconvenient to other people or they're distracting or whatever. So they suppress the stims. But ultimately, their sensory profile means that they're either sensory seekers or they're sensory avoidant. They can't ignore how they perceive the world. So they end up either traumatized or lacking the stimulus they really need. So that's the kind of stuff we look at. And it's fascinating. I love doing it because we're all so different.
Fantastic. Yeah. And yeah, particularly Annette's, like you said, interested in Annette's work. Actually, Annette, for a number of your workshops you did with your participants, your autistic participants, it was very much workshops based on the senses. So it was like, this week we're going to do sense of smell, this week we're and working out for each individual autistic person, didn't you? So lots of sensory based workshops.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think autistic experience is all about the senses. Autistic people have been saying that for years, and it's just starting to be kind of recognized within the research. But you can explain most of autistic people's behaviors and through sensory differences. And yeah, I just got fascinated with that. And obviously, stimming is kind of the reaction to our sensory experiences.
And I would say that's, I mean, really my understanding of autistic experience being at its baseline about sensory processing came from doing a lot of work and workshops and things with Annette. So now whenever I deliver training, I'm talking about what is autistic experience. If we want to look at it, literally reduce it as much as possible to make it understandable, it is that we process all sensory information coming into the mechanisms of our bodies differently in the brain, and then that means you are going to hear people differently, respond to people differently. It's basic neuroscience, basic psychology, really. So I think, yeah, I think it's probably one of the most useful things to remember that at baseline it's the sensory that's different. And I learned that from Annette. And yeah, at the time, for some reason, I don't know why, it didn't click. It was like, it's so obvious once somebody explains it to you. But I think it can look like it's I don't know, like it's too surface level. So actually we'll get into this. We're going to get into why and everything about sensory. Because we've had you both on before, can you just very briefly, in a couple of sentences, if you can, when did you discover you were autistic? So if I start with Monique, as briefly as you want.
So I was 44 when I finally discovered I was autistic, and I only discovered that because my children had started on the diagnostic pathway and things had just click, 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 all fallen into place. So that was me.
And Annette?
And I was 39 years old after kind of a lifetime of struggling and through mental health issues, which kind of never went away, no matter what I did. I finally dealt with it and understood that actually I was autistic, which was fabulous and amazing.
And like I say, and the reason I say, if you've never seen Monique or Annette talking before, we've had both on before, so you're welcome to go back and find out about, in a little bit more detail, if you like, about how they discovered they were autistic. So we've got a little bit of a sort of backwards and forwards, or back and forth between Monique and Annette on how we're going to structure today's discussion. So Monique, do you feel would sort of 10 minutes or so be too much or too little to try and cover the sensory experiences?
I could talk for up to 2 hours. So I'll do my best to be as brief as possible and just run through the basics. Okay.
Yeah, well, we can have a little bit of back and forth then as well. So if it takes a bit longer, that's okay. But yes, the sensory experiences of autistic people, which is very broad as a question, but I don't know where you'd like to start.
Really is. It really is. And most people think of it as the 5 senses. Okay, they think of the visual sense of sight, the auditory, your hearing, and the tactile sense of touch. They only think of those. And even if everyone's disappeared, I'm going to carry on talking in the hope.
Keep carrying on.
Oh no.
It's one of those days.
It really is. I'm so sorry, people.
Yeah.
We're definitely having technology issues. You're back again.
I'm back again. Did I go? I was still talking to the machine there.
Okay, so we got, sensory, people typically think of the 5 senses.
The 5 main senses. So I went over them from
the
sound, where were we? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. are your basic 5 senses. So if we only think about those, we already know that people can perceive senses in very different ways. We know that there's some people who love a hot vindaloo, and there's some people who you put one tiny drop of pepper on their food and that's it, it's completely ruined. So we know that there's variety in how we perceive things, but it's not commonly applied to regular things like lighting, like being in a canteen. You know, I can't count the amount of times when I was little where I'd say things like, this is too light or too bright or this is too loud, and the answer I'd get from teachers and stuff would be, don't be silly, it's not, it's fine for everyone else, because they weren't perceiving it the way I was perceiving it. So even with those 5 main senses, we can perceive things very, very differently. But then, you know, we have to look at the other things that actually are factors that we don't regularly consider, other sensory inputs. So we have to look at like the vestibular, the movement, thermoreception or thermoception. I can't quite work out which way it's meant to be said, but, you know, the way we interpret heat, noiseception. Another one that this is not good for dyslexics. I really can't pronounce half the words, but noiseception is how we interpret pain, but not just how we interpret pain, how our body, that same system is meant to warn us of dangers. So people who have, you know, a really high tolerance to heat might find that, you know, they're also the kind of people that put their hands into fires to move logs around without thinking, oh, that could burn me. There's connections with the way we interpret our senses. There's our sense of proprioception. So a lot of us are also dyspraxic. The sense of proprioception really plays a factor in that one, I think. Certainly does amongst my clients. And then, of course, there's the biggie, as I call it, your interoception, how you sense the things within you. So not just how you hear your own heartbeat or how you hear your blood running around the blood vessels. It's even down to how you sense your emotions. So with me, I have what I'd call an explosive temperament because I don't realize when a mood is building up. I don't notice the triggers. I don't notice the red flags that should be going up everywhere. So for me, it's suddenly I'm absolutely fine. I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing, and then suddenly I'm overwhelmed with one emotion or another. So it's your sense of interoception will be a massive factor in how you perceive the world around you, as well as how you perceive what's going on in your body. So obviously, if you're going to the doctors and they're saying, where does it hurt? I know a number of my clients who, when they're in pain, have developed this wonderful technique of getting a felt tip pen and putting a marker on where it hurts at the time, so that when they go to the doctor, they can say, oh, I drew it on me. Because after the pain has gone, they're not going to remember, they're not going to be able to pinpoint it anymore, because their sense of interoception just isn't as strong. So when I do my training, I tend to look at it like a graphic equalizer kind of thing, where you've got all these different senses and they're all across this board. So with neurotypical people, most of the markers will be hovering across the middle. Not in a straight line, because no two people are going to be the same, but they're all going to be hovering across the middle. They might even have one or two of the senses that are at the hypo, where they're less aware of it, or at the hyper, where they're hyper aware of it, where it's actually, it can overwhelm them. So if they have a sensitivity to light, for example, that if they don't know that, then, you know, you'll be able to tell, because they're most likely to wear a baseball cap or sunglasses or a hood. You know, on a sunny day, they'll be shielding their eyes. And when they aren't, you know, they'll probably be squinting a lot. There are blatant signs. And it's not behaviors. It's never behaviors, in my view. It's a reaction to the environment. So with a lot of what I see, it's developing techniques around these sensors, but also actually doing their own graphic equalizer, getting to mark where their sensors are. Because the one thing that I can guarantee every autistic person and every neurotypical person will have in common is that no one's ever told them what normal is. No one's ever said, this is how you're meant to perceive light. This is how it's ideal to perceive sound, and even if they did, they'd probably be wrong, because people who are really sensitive to sound, they might only be sensitive to certain sounds. They might be able to tolerate some sounds really, really well. But things like whistles, things like sudden bangs, it causes pain. But at the same time, their sense is so well developed that actually that's why they can hear individual instruments when an orchestra is playing or something. The flip side of the coin is that if you're hypersensitive to something or hyposensitive to something, it means that you're perceiving it differently to the majority of people. But regardless of whether it's, I have a very hyposensitivity to pain, so I can tolerate a lot of pain. So it meant that having my children was really easy. It was a really quick, pretty much pain-free experience for me, which is not how most women describe labour. But for me, it really was. But on the negative side, it means that, I'm not noticing when I'm cutting myself. I'm going to bed and it's like a running joke in our house, because both me and my husband are the same on this one. We find ourselves covered in bruises. Where did we get that? What did we do? Absolutely no idea, because it didn't even register. We just carried on going after we did it. So there's downsides to the having low tolerance and positive sides to it. But what I tend to do with the clients then is talk about how this manifests in stimming, because they've been suppressing their stimming for so long. And this is where Annette's going to be able to talk about this so much better than me, because it is a reaction, I think, to either the sensory things that we need in order to ground us, or the sensory avoidant things that we do in order to protect us. But the stimming, what I've found in every single person that I've dealt with or helped in any way, is that they all benefit from stimming. It's something that we actually get a lot of benefit from. So it's not something that I would ever think people should suppress in any way, but it is brilliant for then working out where the sensory issues are, because we stim in different ways, and the things that we're doing to stim will be clues as to what it is we're missing. So it's quite easy to tell people with proprioception difficulties, because they're the ones in queues that are kind of stomping from one foot to the other, continuously moving from one side to the other. They need that proprioception, that feedback to feel grounded. Otherwise they feel unsteady on their feet. So the way we perceive everything affects the way we behave. They're not strange behaviors. They're reactions to the way our senses are telling us we need to act. So that's my input, as briefly as I can do it there.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things we can talk about there, and I know Annette probably has got some thoughts as well, but there's two things I was thinking of, which is that the importance of trying to get people who don't understand this to understand the nuance, because I think, particularly if you look at the diagnostic manual, it talks about hyper and hypo, so hyper sense avoidant and hypo sense seeking potentially, as if they're separate things, and as if you are only likely to be wholly hypersensitive or wholly hyposensitive, like sense seeking or sense avoiding, and ignoring the fact that you can, for one particular sense, i.e., like you said, sound, be both sense seeking and sense avoidant, and things like that. So actually getting people to understand the nuance, and a couple of people, I think it was Bobby as well, saying that at different times, different contexts, depending on how well we're doing, if we've got low spoons and we're getting burnt out, I am much more sensitive then, and maybe some people might be more sense seeking for particular things at those times. So trying to get people to understand it's not this static, one very shallow thing.
Yeah.
That's a go.
Oh, I was just going to say we can probably skip a few of my slides because you just basically said them.
Say them again. People need to hear them.
Yeah, I think it's very important that your sensory differences fluctuate day, week, year due to environment, well-being, support needs met or support needs not being met. Whether you're on your period or not. I mean, if you're on your period, then it's really extreme. And that a lot of times you're sensory seeking and the sensory avoidant, and sometimes within the same sense, and sometimes depending on those different fluctuations. So it is very complicated.
It particularly gets complicated when you're with so my partner is sense seeking for a lot of things that I'm sense avoidant. And so then you end up with that problematic clash, because he gets kind of upset that I can't sit and he's bald, completely bald, whereas I've just got a shaved head. He gets really upset that I can't sit there and stroke his head, because it makes my fingers feel, it's not painful, but it's distressing. And I can still feel it several minutes later on my fingers, and trying to explain that, because like I said, it's back to this idea of I'm quite, like I said, I'm quite tolerant of pain. So when I've had 2 tattoos in my lifetime, and the second one, I was pretty much just snoozing, just having a little snooze while they gave me a tattoo, because I was in control of it. I could manage the pain. I understood the pain. But I'm incredibly tactile sensitive. So anything which is why I don't have hair, because of the just gentle, is actually, that was horrible. Just the gentle feel, my skin is no, this is not nice at all. Whereas the more, if I'm going to have a massage, it has to be deep tissue massage, not gentle stroking, because that would make me feel really awful and weird. So yeah, it's so much more nuanced than I think.
And then you've got the ones as well where we don't like something. So with me, I don't like to be touched. However, knowing where the boundaries are, because I love to touch things. So if something looks like it's a really nice texture, I can sit there and stroke it for ages. And when I was younger, it didn't matter if it was my teacher's shirt or, a friend's skirt or something. So even though I don't like to be touched by other people, I love to touch other things. And so as an adult, I learned, you can't just stroke people because they're wearing something really nice. But, that is a confusion for people. How come you don't like people to do something to you, and yet, that boundary isn't there when it's the other way around? And it comes down to the sensory thing but it feels so nice, and it just doesn't occur to us that, the boundaries are different.
And I used to subconsciously do that, rub on my fingers, my partner's thigh or something, and them not know, I'm not knowing that I'm doing it, and they're like, that's really bothering me. Could you stop? And part of the workshops and actually the performance of Super Autie Gang, a couple of participants called themselves fabric creepers, where they felt that whenever they went into a department store anyway, I think they wanted to touch all the nice fabrics, and sometimes those were connected to mannequins, they thought, although sometimes it was actually human beings. So yeah, it's that whole thing of just really wanting to touch things and feel them, and not realizing that actually, they're connected to a human being.
So shall we jump into Annette's presentation? It's okay if you recover some things.
Okay, we can always just skip slides or just talk about the good, amazing artwork that I've also put on there. Not my own. So.
Well, I need to get to the actual PowerPoint, so I might have to move you folks over there.
So Chloe's got the PowerPoint.
Yep. So I will sit here quietly being your
slide.
Yep. So do you want to start on this one?
Yeah. So basically, I call this presentation The Wonderful World of Stimming, but I wanted to highlight some artists that actually have made some work about stimming. And this is actually Meredith K. Ultra. She has an Ink and Daggers Tumblr.com account, as well as Instagram and all sorts of other things. But I thought these were just amazing images of people stimming, and said the celebration of stimming, and the whole idea that you respect the stim. You know, and autistic people have been saying that for years, that stimming is a positive thing for autistic people, and it's high time that that became the norm, that everybody knows that. Slide. Okay, I think we can probably skip this, although this is another artist, a neurodivergent artist, Kelly Dillon, who has Eat Off Plastic, which is her Instagram account. But, you know, talking about sensory experience, and I really love this drawing of, you know, wait, what's that? And then the next is the sensory, and it's just madness, and that's like a little brain, you know, what's happening. And to a certain extent, when we're not doing well as autistic people, you know, that is what it feels like. To some people, that's what it's like every single day. No wonder we get burned out. No wonder we find it difficult to be around other, you know, people and being, you know, in loud places, because it's very intense. Yeah, I think we've covered all this. Yeah, we've covered that as well. But I love this image as well by Kelly Dillon, which is waves of sensory death, and your brain being attacked by it, which I think is fabulous. And what a great depiction of what you know, that experience, and all the different experiences of sensory. Okay, so one of the important things is that, you know, like I said, the autistic community has been talking about this for years, but researchers are starting to notice. There's been two very recent articles based on interviews with autistic adults about stimming. And basically, you know, they're saying, oh, wow, stimming is actually a good thing. And autistic people experience, you know, sensory differences, which are actually quite difficult for them to handle. And so we've got, people should be allowed to do what they like, which is actually a quote from one of the participants. Autistic adults' views and experiences on stimming. And that's from 2019. And then we've got this brand new article, which is from 2021, I think November. It's just hasn't even come out yet, but it's very similar. It feels like holding back something you need to say. Another quote. So, you know, that whole idea that autistic people, you know, we're holding back parts of ourselves when we're hiding stimming. And this is actually with mostly autistic people, but there are some non-autistic people who stim, which I didn't look if they were neurodivergent, but I would assume possibly. But all human beings stim. That's another thing to remember, that stimming is a human thing. If you sit in a room filled with neurotypical people, you will see people twisting their hair, you will see people scratching their nose, you will see people rocking a little bit, or playing with their fingers. Everybody, you know, shaking their foot. That is a neurotypical. It's a human thing. Autistic people tend to stim more because of our sensory differences and our experience of the world, and that sensory difference. We need to regulate our sensory experience more than a non-autistic person would. Yeah, hypo and hyper experience often leads to need for repetition as well, and routine that results in stimming, or you could say self-stimulatory behavior. And this aids protect ourselves from the often chaotic sensory world. And I think ultimately a sense of routine and something repeating over and over is quite calming to an autistic person. And stimming does that in all sorts of different ways. And when you're being kind of overwhelmed by the world constantly, you have this kind of onslaught of sensory experience. To be able to do something that's just the same over and over again is a very calming, and it not only regulates our sensory experience, but it also is quite meditative, which hopefully you'll all experience later if we get to that, if we manage to do some mindful stimming.
And as everybody knows, I really hate the term self-stimulatory behaviour. It just sounds so rude. And so I'm quite glad that we have this word stimming instead, because it's just, why would you come up with something like that? It's a regulatory behaviour. You know, could you not have self-regulatory behaviour instead as a term? Just
I know it doesn't sound right. Although some people don't like the sound of stims. I think stimming is a great word. Stimmy, I love it. Yeah. So, okay, next slide. Yeah, once you realize the way that we process all sensory information is different, non-autistic people from non-autistic people, it becomes clear why we experience the world the way that we do, and also why non-autistic people often fail to understand us, because ultimately our sensory experience of the world is how we experience the world. It's everything. It completely, we experience the world in a different way as autistic people. And we all experience differently. As Monique was saying, everyone is so unique, and there's so many nuances to, you know, whether you're, you know, I was talking earlier about my sense of taste. I'm a sensory seeking. I love hot things and sweet things and salty things. Where, you know, with the sense of sound, loud sounds are like a slap in the face to me. And that was one of the things within the workshops where I worked with people for my PhD. Sound was one of the things a lot of us had in common, that loud sounds were physically painful to us. And, you know, that's one of the things we often hide from. And that's why you see autistic people always with, you know, noise canceling headphones, all sorts of things. Because for me, I didn't realize how much it was affecting me. And it was something I kind of had to teach myself. I had to go, it's like a buildup all day long of sound. And the more sound I experience, the more I get slowly overwhelmed, and it's kind of going up like this. And I realized if I did kind of block a lot of that noise out, just everyday noise, walking down the street, getting on a bus, going into a cafe, all those things, if I could control that to a certain extent and not experience that onslaught of sound every day, I was less likely to melt down. I was less likely to kind of feel completely overwhelmed and exhausted from the anxiety that experience created for me. Okay, we can go to the next one. Yeah, just talking about repetition and sameness again. Need for routine makes sense when the experience of the sensory and thus our social environment is loud, smelly, bright, painful, and overall chaotic, which is what I was just been saying. So what is stimming? I think we can move on to that, which is the next slide. Stimming is the autistic community's name, as Chloe said, for self-stimulatory behavior, which basically refers to any behavior or activity, both physical or cognitive, which autistic people do consciously or unconsciously. There's so many ways that we do it to regulate our sensory world. And I love this image, once again, by Meredith K. Ultra. So we've got somebody actually stimming, stim dancing, yeah, or stim swaying, which is fabulous. And even, you know, a lot of the people in the workshop that I said, we were talking about fabric earlier, the feel of fabric when you move is, you know, that swishy feeling was something that they absolutely adored and talked about all the time, especially people that refer to themselves as fabric creepers.
And I think I just want to pick up on what you said as well about the conscious and unconscious, because I mentioned this a little in a session recently as well. I saw a lovely video of an autistic adult wanting to share their stims with their friend. And they would like swaying and dancing and all this kind of thing. And the comments were awful, because it was like, stimming is unconscious, this is fake, etc., etc. And it's like, no, stimming can be unconscious or conscious. And to some extent, a lot of what Annette has talked about and worked with autistic people is to actually help us become more conscious, so that we do it more consciously and actually help ourselves more often to regulate, as opposed to getting to a place where maybe we end up doing more harmful stims, for instance. But yeah, that we can be both conscious and unconsciously stimming.
Yes, Definitely. I think if you are a late diagnosed autistic person, well, I don't know. I think stimming is so stigmatized, and that's one of that new research that I talked about earlier. That was one of the things, you know, that the stigmatization of stimming is harmful to autistic people. Not being allowed to speak stimming seen as a negative thing, and you know, kids being told not to stim is actually really detrimental to the autistic community and to autistic people. And ultimately, until that changes, you know, all we can do. I mean, to a certain extent, I didn't even know I stimmed until I found out I was autistic. And even when I found out I was autistic, it was years before I got, you know, I still thought, oh, I don't stim. I don't do that thing. And it was just noticing all sorts of little things. And actually, yeah, I'll talk about it later, but I had to actually reteach myself how to stim again, and to enjoy stimming, and to do it consciously. So yeah, the next slide, Chloe, I think. So, I mean, we talked about cognitive. So when I talk about like cognitive stimming, you can stim in your head. So you could count, you could repeat words or phrases, which is called echolalia, or someone might call it an earworm. You could sing, you could doodle, you could hum, you could bounce, rock, flap, jiggle, shake, all sorts. There's so many different ways to stim. You could look at shiny objects. Which is very stimmy. Obviously, we talked about feeling fabric, which is another way of stimming. Listen to songs, which I think was mentioned in the chat a little bit. Listen to songs or sounds over and over again. There was one person in my research who listened to very small, minute bits of sounds, which they would play over and over again and record. And then they would try to share that. They would want to share that with someone. And, you know, they tried to share it with their parents, but the parents just like, why are you sharing this like tiny, you know, 1 second of sound? They're like, but it's so cool. It's amazing, you know. But obviously when they met other autistic people and realized other people like things like that too, is obviously much better. The list of stimming is endless, and there's no right or wrong way to stim. And I just asked, how do you stim? Which Chloe usually asks at the end, which I think we'll talk about at the end. So a lot of people like stimming with objects. Many autistic people stim with what we like to call, I like to call them stim tools, because I think there's been a lot of attention been made on stimming in children and calling them toys. And actually, I mean, playing is amazing. I'm an artist. That's what I learned how to do. And I think playing is awesome. But I think there are also tools for us to regulate our sensory experience. And that's really important to acknowledge, and for people to think, oh, I'm just playing with toys. No, you're actually doing something really important for your brain and for your body and your mental well-being. So yeah, sensory tools or stim tools. So these are just a few different places. I'm sure that people know even more cool places, but ultimately, there's no right or wrong way or right or wrong stim object. It could be anything. It could be a stone that you pick up from the beach. It could be a shell, a piece of wood that you like touching. It could be craft. Maybe you like to knit, or you like to crochet, or you like to applique, or I mean, ultimately anything. Maybe you like stimming. I know a lot of people who like stimming with a remote control. You know, I used to run my fingers over the buttons over and over and over again until it got worn out. You couldn't even tell what anything was supposed to be. A lot of people like game consoles, just playing with those. So there's all sorts of different things that you can do. And there's lots of different stim tools out there now. And I advise everyone should have a kit of stim tools. And you want to have more than one. You want to have 2 at least of each stim tool, because then when you go out and you might use it, and somebody, usually a neurotypical, goes, oh, what's that? That's a strange thing. can I play with that? And they take it away from you, and you know, which is good. You can start talking about it, but then you don't have the Stim tool that you need to regulate your sensory experience. So have two of them. So you can pass one out and it can become, you know, a discussion and people can talk, but you can also still have your Stim tool, which is something that you need. Okay, next slide. I'm getting behind here. Yeah, the other really important thing that came out of my research was that stimming, and autistic people know already, but you know, stimming expresses emotions, and to a certain extent, there's been a, you know, the stereotype is that it expresses negative emotions, that it expresses anxiety, and actually that's very much, it does express anxiety, but it also expresses excitement, joy, boredom, frustration, you know, all sorts of different, everything, sadness, all different types of emotions. And it is, like the person was saying, you know, I believe that stimming is a language. It's autistic language. And it's been suppressed for a very, very long time. And I believe that it is part of our culture, and it needs to be celebrated and studied and looked at in a way that, you know, it's very, very important part of our culture that's kind of been stifled. Yeah. What else have I got in there? Okay. So yeah, I think I have a little discussion there, but we can probably, I mean, do you stim? That's what I was talking about earlier, Chloe. Do you want to just skip that slide and talk about that later? Okay, so we've got hidden stims. So this is something that also came out of my research, and something that me and Chloe really observed in the workshops that we did with the amazing autistic people that we worked with, was that a lot of autistic people have hidden stims and are socially pressured by people around them not to stim in autistic ways. So stims become really minute. They become tiny little things. And I think, Chloe, this has got, for some reason, this is the only one that's got, yeah, there we go. So we would suppress them to fit into the non-autistic world. And actually it's a form of masking, which we were talking about earlier. And we tend to do very small, hidden, or socially acceptable stims. So I think, Chloe, yours was nail flicking. Yeah, yeah. Nail or cuticle biting, which is something that I did quite a lot. Chewing on objects like pens, writing words with your finger. I mean, that was one that I did. Scratching, which a lot of people do, or picking, counting things or saying words in your head, swaying or pacing, playing with objects in your pocket, so it's hidden, which a lot of people tend to do and don't even realize that that's what they're doing. Playing with jewelry or hairbands. I have a hairband on my wrist that I constantly play with. And ultimately, a lot of times these hidden stims are in a response to the social pressure, to the stigma of stimming. And a lot, you know, a lot of autistic people are not allowed to use stimming to cope. So if we move on to the next slide, Chloe, yeah. And what happens is these become harmful stims if we're not allowed to stim to cope, because we perceive others around us see our stimming activity as kind of weird or strange. This can kind of lead to more harmful stims. And it's usually a lot of those things, the more acceptable things, like it's more acceptable for me to bite my nails than it is for me to flap my hands. Yeah, so it goes from, you know, a child who's just excited, like, yes, to being told not to do that, to then biting your nails because you have to do something. But then the anxiety is so bad and you can't actually stim the way that you want to stim. So you start to bite your nails so much that they bleed. Yeah, this is probably trigger warning as well. I didn't think about that, Chloe, but I used to bite, and then I used to bite my cuticles until they would bleed. A lot of people have things like scratching or picking. As a teenager, I used to pick my face from anxiety. So there's all sorts of different things that from our research as well that a lot of people experienced, and all of us saw it as a direct relation to being stopped stimming as children. And these kind of came out in teenage years in particular, where obviously the pressure to fit in is at its height, and very difficult for a lot of autistic people. What else? We got hair pulling, eyelash. A lot of people talked about eyelash pulling. And then also, you know, our pleasant headbanging, which a lot of people do. I had a boyfriend who used to do it before he went to sleep at night. So he had a nice soft headboard, and every night before he went to sleep, it was kind of like a rock, kind of gentle headbang. But obviously that also can become something more forceful and harmful. So what we need to do, yes, go ahead, Chloe, that's fine.
I was just gonna, just because this has been one of the most important things, I guess, that we kind of recognized and then started working with autistic people in terms of picking apart the difference between, and we've done a whole session on harmful stims versus self-harm on Aucademy. So I'm not going to go into loads of detail now. And Si, if you're able, if you could link that particular live or that particular session. But it was really important because it's about picking apart the difference between, is it a psychological self-harm need that somebody's, you know, I don't mean purposely self-harming. It's very, very complicated, obviously, when it comes to self-harm, and there's no judgment on any of these activities or behaviours. It's just the important difference is one is a psychological need. That person has a particular need and it comes out as self-harm, versus is it an autistic need to regulate via the senses and sensory needs and stimming and so on, and that stimming has gone too far and ended up inadvertently causing harm. So that's what Annette and I looked at quite a lot with people is, we need to obviously make sure for safeguarding reasons, but then when we know what difference we're talking about, if it's harmful stimming, it's a wholly different set of approaches and understanding than it might be if it's psychological self-harm. Hopefully that makes sense. Like I say, there's a whole video that I did with David Gray Hammond on that topic if people are interested. So shall I move to the next one?
Yeah. I mean, basically what we discovered was that if people were allowed to stim and kind of, you know, there was one person in the group that scratched, and they scratched their arms and they had scars on their arms from scratching so much. And they wanted to stop scratching. They thought, you know, this is a stim, but it's a harmful stim, but I don't want to do this anymore. And we found one of those, I can't remember what they're called. It's the round thing you put on your arm and it goes, whee!
I think it's a kinetic band.
Yeah.
Like the slinkies.
Not quite. No. I'll see if I can find one to
Yeah. But they started playing with that and they said, oh my God, this feels better than scratching. So what a lot of people found in the workshops is that if they practiced playful, fun stimming that they enjoyed, they were less likely to do the harmful stims. Obviously, when they get really stressed, that comes back again, and that's something that we all have to work on. You know, I'm thinking about, okay, I'm starting to scratch. Okay, where's my stim toys? I'll play with those instead. And there's no kind of value judgment, obviously, on that, like Chloe was saying. So if we move on to the next slide.
Yeah, and just it is a 3D or a kinetic bangle. It's basically a number of interlocking rings that you put on your arm, and then it kind of pops up like, it's hard to describe, but it's beautiful, and it's beautiful to watch. So if you're a visual sensory seeker, which I'm actually not particularly, then it's lovely to watch. But the tactile is really lovely as well, because it's like the rings will roll down your arm. But yeah, you can definitely find them quite easily on Amazon and places like that.
Yeah. Cool. So basically, really quickly, embracing and encouraging non-harmful stim regulations. So for better well-being, it's important to reteach ourselves how to stim in a positive, less harmful way to allow us to be more our autistic, authentic selves, you know, to be able to stim and not feel that we're going, you know, that's a bad thing. It's actually amazing it's self-care. Stimming is self-care, and that's what we need to get across to everyone within, you know, the world. That stimming is actually is an amazing. It's so fun as well. Like it can be so, like you were talking. I can't remember what you were saying, Monique, but that being fully embraced and in something and fully within it, and you can do that while you're stimming. It is all encompassing, which is just like amazing. You know, the beauty of the Stim, I think, is really important. And it's not enough, you know, to a certain extent to say, stop picking to yourself, stop picking, Annette, stop picking your face. Get a Stim toy and start playing with it, you know. Don't be, I think, be kind to yourself. I think that's really important. That's kind of my mantra. I have to tell myself that every single day because I am famous for beating myself up constantly. But, being kind to yourself and instead of kind of giving yourself a negative, give yourself a positive. Play with stimming. So these are the things that we kind of came up with from the workshops of what we'll recommend. So next slide, Chloe.
Okay. I was going to say, are you going to talk, so what you just said about, we had a number of autistic people who, like I said, they wanted to reduce those harmful stims. They didn't mean to be doing them, but they had a regulatory need. And their families obviously were trying to help by saying stop whenever they saw them doing it, because largely it was unconscious. But like Annette said, that's not enough. You need to be replacing it with, as you mentioned, Monique, what is the sensory need that they were getting from that activity or whatever it might be? Can we replace it with something that's obviously not going to harm them, but is going to give that regulatory need? And it's particularly why Annette and I, particularly if we're working with autistic people who, again, trying to help them find their stims, we have a massive suitcase that's just full of lots of different stim objects, because one stim object might be okay for one autistic person but not another. And I've mentioned this before, I have no interest in fidget spinners. They don't do it for me. And I worked out why, because I want tactile. I don't find fidget spinners give me that feedback enough. They don't, unless they're really weighty or something like that. And a student made me aware that they liked it for the visual, and a lot of the others were saying, it's the visual, and that's what it is. I'm not particularly interested visually, so that's not obviously going to give me what I need. I need the more tactile feedback. So having that suitcase has been great, because then we get to find what suits you and what needs are being met.
Try as many things as possible, really, because you never know what's actually going to work for you. I think that's oh no, hello. Okay, I'm going to keep talking, even though, okay. Keep going with the text, Chloe. I think there's a little bit more text on the slide. Yeah. Okay. So the importance of stimming for mental health, once again, quickly. Keep a stim diary. So think about when you stim, how you stim. And that's a really important, especially if you're kind of like, I don't stim, or when do I stim? Thinking about when you do and when you don't. Share your stims with other autistic people in autistic spaces. Stimming together is amazing, and it should be done as much as possible. Autistic people in autistic spaces, stimming is the most beautiful thing ever. Create a regular stim routine, 5 minutes a day, to help reduce stress, overwhelm, and harmful stimming. Be kind to yourselves. Just give yourself 5 minutes a day to play, even if, it could be anything. Like we said, it could be a stone that you find at the beach that you like to touch. Create a stim kit with lots of different things that you like, because you never know what you might need in relation to regulating your sensory experience. And keep 2 of everything, like I said, just so that neurotypicals don't steal them. Wear clothes with pockets in them to stim inside, pockets are just awesome. Anyways, I think at the ending is it have at least 2 things. So so that's me. And
so that's it for the PowerPoint. Have you got any other bits on there you wanted us to share? Because we're going to do the mindful stim at the end, aren't we?
Yeah. No, that's it.
That's it. Okay, lovely, fantastic. Any thoughts, Monique? Because obviously I've seen that stuff before. I know all the things that Annette would have been talking about. So I don't know if you've got any extra things you wanted to add or.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that just backs up everything I see as well. So it just, every time I hear someone speaking on this, I think, ooh, is it going to be different? But no, I think we're all finding the exact same experience amongst all the autistic people we're coming across, where actually it's so beneficial for them to not just realize that they need to stim, but to work out why they need to stim, and what they're getting from the stims. And I mean, it kind of makes me think, like, when supermarkets do their quiet hour, I think, that's really good for some people, I'm sure. I'm sure for some people it's fantastic that they've taken the music away, but there's still so much peripheral sound in there that actually for people like me, they've taken away the one thing that enabled me to switch off to everything else. I could focus in on the music, not if it's too loud, but if it's just there in the background, I could focus in on the music. And even at my age, I still get told off because, well, the groove always gets me. I can't, even in a shop, if there's music on, my body starts to move to the music. So whoever's with me either gets embarrassed or joins in with me. But, for me, that's a massive factor that, when they did the autism quiet hours, took that away from me, that the ability to stim kind of in a more acceptable way. Because even though we're not meant to dance in shops, it's almost acceptable. People might just give you a funny look and chuckle. Some people actually, say, oh, we should see more of that. But it's not seen as too weird. Whereas if I'm doing this and I'm walking around, people perceive me as threatening, or, that it's not safe to stim like that. So I think part of what I do, going to the businesses and stuff, is trying to teach them these behaviors so that they can understand why we do it, so that it normalizes our behaviors. Because as you say, it's a different language. They don't understand the way we speak. They don't understand our method of communication. So it's about bridging that gap and saying, well, look, actually, it's pretty standard. We're all reacting to the environment. This is why we're doing it. And, we all have such different profiles that no two of us are ever going to present the same. But it fascinates me.
And it was interesting, some of the participants kept stim diaries, and realizing that some stims, depending on the day, would be would express different types of emotions as well, or the stim might change. So it might change slightly and be for more anxiety, where if they're more happy, that same stim is a little bit different, which they felt is easily identifiable. But expressing emotions in those ways is pretty amazing. And I think, happy stim, flappy hands, all those things, obvious that we're expressing emotions and we're expressing, we're communicating with people. And there's so much that you can actually learn about an autistic person through their stims. And I think that's been completely under-researched, and because it's just been seen as a negative thing that needs to be eradicated from the world.
That's it.
And that's the thing. Sorry, go on.
So I was just thinking, it comes down to the wearing hoods, because it keeps some of that glare out for people who are really sensitive to light. How many teenagers walk around their house with a hood up, and parents going, why on earth would you do that indoors? That's really weird. Well, for a lot of them, they're probably doing it because it actually controls their line of vision, and it allows them to focus on what they want to focus on. There's so many distractions. I mean, most houses, there's so many different things to look at, and it focuses that vision. And sometimes we need to reduce the stimulus, no matter whether it's light or whether it's just movement of people, or whether it's, other things, bookshelves, anything with color. Sometimes the more we reduce it, the more we're able to just, get into that, I call it a trance state, But it is just that sensation you get, just before you fall asleep or just after you wake up, where you're not really conscious of what's going on around you anymore because you've been able to delve into something else. And when you do that, that's pure relaxation to me. So that's what we're going to talk about a bit later. But
yeah. Well, that's my favourite. I love sleep. Louis always jokes about it, but I love sleep. It's my favourite thing. So just calming and relaxing and things for me. If I can sleep well, obviously a number of us can at times, if not always, really struggle with sleep. I had a thought before and I can't think what it was now. Oh no. Oh, I was thinking back to some of Annette's workshops, and one of them, and actually something we built into our So You're Autistic program, was sharing Stims, and I enjoy that. It's partly why, there's a number of reasons, but it's partly why I always have at the end of our sessions, what is your favourite Stim? Because I'm nosy. I want to know what other people's, because what if I really like it and I've never found it before, and actually I get to try it. So when we would do that with Annette's workshops and, like say, the other programs we've done, I remember we used to stand in a circle, didn't we, in the drama studio, and we would just ask, what is a Stim that you could do now that you could show people? And then we would all have a go if we were comfortable. Obviously, there was always, that caveat of don't do anything you don't want to. I think one person's one was something in relation to hugging or something. So a number of us didn't do that particular Stim.
Stimmy hug. Stimmy hug.
Okay, yeah.
But then they were so great, because that's the amazing thing about the autistic community, is they knew that a lot of people wouldn't be able to hug. So they shared another Stim as well. So people could choose which one they wanted to do. And it was about happy Stims in particular, which was hard for people. People were like, gosh, I don't know if I have a happy Stim. But everyone did. They just didn't understand it at first because it's so stigmatized. What their happy Stim was, because it never identified it as a happy Stim.
Mine that I'd actually borrowed from a friend, that I actually used in a number of different ways. I did it to kind of amuse myself and entertain myself to some extent because of the feel of it with people when I used to work for a big beauty and chemist chain. And so I always laugh that I don't say which one it is. And it's this the way to describe it is obviously the other person has to be comfortable as well. So obviously if there's an autistic person, they might not be. And it's nothing, it's just that person holds their hand out, like hands out like this, and then you gently tap the top of their hands, but then you swap. So you're doing it to one another. So yeah, like Annette's showing, but you're doing it with somebody else. So it doesn't really work very well by myself. I feel a bit strange doing it by myself. It's a thing you would do with another person very gently. So like I say, not everybody would want to necessarily do that. But I remember, it's a really weird caveat, but I remember attending an undergrad, one of my lectures or seminars, and the student that I got on with that was sitting next to me looked really, really tearful, but they wanted to stay during the lecture. They didn't want to miss it, kind of thing. And I was like, are you okay? And it's like, yeah, I don't want to talk about it. So I thought, right, okay, they don't want to talk about it, but I can see that they're thinking and they're going to cry. So I literally, without really explaining anything, got them to do this with me. And I didn't explain, I didn't describe it or anything. We just started doing that for quite a little while. And then she's going, what are we doing? And she's laughing. And I went, making you smile, because it distracted her. As far as I know, she was neurotypical, but it took her out of whatever it was that was going on for her, and it really distracted her, and she was just amused as well, because she's like, what are we doing? I was just like, making you laugh, making you smile. So it can be such a lovely, important thing for us to do. So usually everyone on Aucademy will be used to us doing this question at the end, but we're going to do it now, because then we're going to go into, Monique's going to talk about relaxation, and then we're actually going to try and end on Annette's mindful stimming, so that we're all relaxed when we finish. So next week, I'll talk about what we're doing next week as well. So I'll do that now, and then when we actually finish, it will be the Annette mindful stimming that we all get to finish on and feel nice and calm. So next week, we're still on the topic of sensory. And so we've got Emma Reardon on, who will be talking about the work that they've done looking at the importance of understanding sensory trauma. So obviously today we're talking relatively positively about sensory. We have talked a little bit about harmful stims. We've talked about sensory, we've talked about stimming, and so Emma's going to come on to explain the importance of understanding sensory trauma, because it's not really understood or recognised, and so that's adding to the discussions that we've got now. So that's what we're doing next week. So I still want to ask, because I do like asking this question, and you are all welcome in the comment section, although I've seen people talking about their stimming, to answer as well. So what is your favourite stim? So I'm going to ask Monique, has it changed since last week?
Not really. I spend all my free time trying to mimic really deep voices. So singing songs that are incredibly deep, it just soothes me. It seems to block out enough external noise, and it humours me. So by the end of it, I'm usually laughing and in a good mood. So it really does, it grounds my emotions as well.
Fantastic. And Annette,
Awesome.
Well,
I just have a new one, because Chloe gave me, I don't have it with me, but she gave me a spinny ring. And it she's got one, yes. And I have to do it with my other finger because I'm dyspraxic. Can't get my thumb there. But I love spinning that right now. That's really exciting. The other thing that I really love doing is writing words on my hand, which I've done since I was a child. And I realized I was inspired by Helen Keller. I saw a film of Helen Keller when I was a child, had no idea I was autistic, but somehow identified with Helen Keller as a disabled woman, and started writing, because she obviously communicates by writing, because she's deaf and she can't see, on her teacher's hand. But so I started doing that, and I've been doing that ever since, and kind of forgot why. And then once I realized that was my stim, I went back and thought, oh my God, the only kind of disabled woman that I identified with as a child, not even knowing that I actually was autistic.
Can I just say, I've got the cheap ring. It's an elastic band, but I put it around my finger so I can stroke it, because that way I don't accidentally pick at the skin, because I used to gouge holes in my knuckles where I'd literally just keep doing that. So yeah, very cheap version. It doesn't spin, but it provides a use. And again, that's just so I can get away with a stim without it ending up doing me any damage. Yeah.
And Annette, like you said, the one with the weird hairbands that you have, which you really stretch them out. So if you're not used to seeing those, it should be much smaller. So you can actually drop them, I think, in hot water or cold water. I can't remember which way around it is, and they will retract again. So I don't know if you, but yeah, that's what Annette does. It's like almost like a rosary bead mentality, motion. But yeah, at the moment, I do go through different stages when it comes to stim objects and tools. So like everyone's seen, I really like the ring at the moment. So that's very much my thing at the moment. But I still, even as we've been talking, I've still been doing a finger-based one. So I think that typically for the majority of us will be our go-to, is something in relation to our own bodies that you can take everywhere, obviously. But yeah, I think I've, for a while I was really loving this thing, and so all sorts of things, but I just, changed my mind over time. Fantastic. Right. So now we want to have a little discussion with Monique about relaxation in general for autistic people. And so based on something we were talking about earlier on. So Monique.
So I got into this, I suppose, because I looked at hypnotherapy. So I did a hypnotherapy course, not because I wanted to be a practitioner, but because I wanted to actually feel, for once in my life, like I'd switched off and was able to relax, because my brain just felt like it was always like a whirlwind, always images, always things going on. And I'd try to do meditation at home, but, I'd try to follow the techniques, and, I'd try to relax my legs, relax my toes, relax my ankles, relax my shins. Oh, I forgot the uniforms, go off and do something. I just didn't have the discipline, and I certainly didn't have the attention span to do it. But you everywhere you go, you fed these adverts on the telly of what a relaxing evening looks like. And it involves a warm bath, aromatherapy candles, soft music, and for some autistics, I'm sure that is their definition of heaven, because they might seek the water sensation and a warm bath, and they might seek the smells. But for many of us, it's probably more akin to torture, having to get changed in a different temperature, getting your body cold, then getting your body warm, then having to dry yourself. So there's certain things that may relax a lot of people, certainly doesn't relax everyone. So what I do with my clients as well is I try to help them identify what relaxation looks like for them. Because the one thing I took from the hypnotherapy course was that, I accept it's impossible to be stressed and relaxed at the same time. Everyone benefits from being a little bit relaxed, even if it's just for 5 minutes a day. So, it's about finding the things that actually relax us. And they don't necessarily look like the things that relax neurotypical people. So, for example, for a lot of autistic people, playing games like Minecraft will be completely as valuable as doing a meditation or hypnotherapy or anything that, if the aim is to get you in a trance-like state so that your body's relaxed, then getting absorbed into the world of Minecraft might be exactly what you need. For other people, there's going to be actual, there'll be sensory seeking, there'll be movement they require. Maybe it's sitting and rocking, maybe they have to cradle their knees and just rock back and forth. There's something for their proprioception, the feedback that they're needing there. So it's about finding the things that actually relax you and finding those Stim gadgets and sensations, even, because sometimes it's not about finding something to stim with. Sometimes it's just rubbing your hand on a piece of wood that feels really nice, or a soft piece of metal or something, or crystals or stones or whatever it is that gives you that feedback that allows you to go into that. I guess if you're looking to identify what that sensation is, it's that moment when you realize people have been talking to you for 5 minutes and you haven't noticed. That's the sensation you're looking for, that deep relaxation. And like I say, it presents very differently in autistic people and also in ADHDers, because sometimes you actually have a need to seek that vestibular, that proprioception, that feedback of movement. And for some people, actually having a short run or a short bounce on a trampoline will leave them in a more relaxed state than trying to meditate for half an hour would. So it's very personal to the individual. It's not what the adverts tell us, that one size suits all. And it's just one of those things that, we need to look into ourselves and say, well, actually, what is it? Is it when I'm listening to loud music and I'm sweating, when I'm doing this? What is the time and what is the activity that allows you to go into that deep relaxation? And then make time to do that every day. But I always advise my clients that when you do it, set a timer. Set a timer, because if you want to relax for half an hour, that's fine. But if you're anything like me, without a timer, you'll realize 6 hours later that, oops, I may have got a bit involved in that. So always set the timer so that you know that you need to pull yourself back out and get on with the other things that you have planned for the day. But every single day, make time to do something that you find relaxes you.
And a number of people are saying things which I would agree with as well, which it might be just watching box sets and things like this. And I've talked about this before, when I'm quite low or burnt out and things like that. I really don't want to find on Netflix some psychological thriller or something. I want something really comforting, potentially that I've watched a million times before, that you can just get absorbed in and, like I say, and switch off from the world. And I want to flag as well, because everyone knows my whole go-to thing at the moment is the importance of whether you think in pictures or not. It's so important. It really leads on to other understandings of yourself. So I left up Victoria's. Victoria ends up swearing a lot with meditation because of that inability to visualize. So Victoria is an AFAN, can't think in pictures. So those kinds of things are really frustrating. And if you don't know that your experience, i.e. of not thinking in pictures, isn't as typical of the general population, then you potentially just feel like you're rubbish at meditation. It's like, actually, no, you're not. It's just you've got a different way that your brain works. And frustratingly, mindfulness and meditation really doesn't work for a large number of people, whether they're autistic or not. But it seems to be this, for the last few years, sort of buzzword is mindfulness.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about, there's a big difference about what mindfulness really means compared to what is peddled as mindfulness. So my understanding for a long time was that mindfulness was that really random headspace dude telling you to focus on your breathing and all that kind of stuff. And I'm very visual. And the problem when I was doing that is then I forget how to breathe, because they're telling you so much to focus on breathing. I'm like, oh, I've forgotten how to breathe. Oh my God, I can't breathe. You know, that's not relaxing to me. But mindfulness doesn't mean that. So Annette can talk about this in a minute. And I just wanted to flag again as well that I've mentioned in other sessions before that the most mindful thing I can think of that I've done in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, particularly since knowing I was autistic, was playing Grlll, so Gris, which is just this really beautiful game that I played it on the Switch. I think you can get it on other devices. But the reason I liked it, I got really absorbed in it, which doesn't very rarely happens for me in games, and I don't game very often. But it was very beautiful. There was no, you couldn't die. You didn't have your health deteriorate or anything like that. You didn't have to collect nonsense that you didn't really need. And it was just a really beautiful, it was all about this journey and stuff like that. And I found that was the most mindful thing I've done as an adult. And Lara's discovery of Lego.
Yeah. And hey, adult coloring, that's another really cool thing. I mean, Amy, I think it also relates to your passions or your special interests or, happy hobbies, whatever you enjoy doing. If you enjoy doing it, it's more than likely going to be something that will relax you. And allow yourself to do those things because that's going to help you to have better well-being ultimately. And don't feel bad that you're spending too much time doing, it could be, like you said, Marvel. It could be some, you love watching Marvel. If that's what relaxes you, then allow yourself to do that. Obviously, I know I'm pretty bad with TV as well, because I'll spend way too many hours watching it. And then it gets to be not good for me anymore. But I think, like you said, setting a timer or only allowing yourself to watch a certain amount.
I was just going to flag. So you had originally had Tanya here saying TikTok scroll hole. So in the sense of getting stuck into TikTok and Instagram with Sai. So this has become a routine that I have at the moment. And I think it is related to my overwhelm and my burnout in recent months, which is at night before I go to bed, which I read before I go to bed because that kind of helps me quiet my mind down. But I watch and scroll through cute and silly things on Instagram for a while. I share them with Sai. Sai shares some with me, and I show Louis and show Annette. But that is very mindful for me because I'm not thinking about what about this job and that role and that person I was supporting today. I need to problem solve. How am I going to help them tomorrow? That kind of thing. It just takes me out of all of that, and I just look at the silliness and the cuteness. And I stim to some of the phrases that you hear over and over again at the moment. So if anyone's been watching, the reels and things like that on Instagram, you'll know what I mean when I say good soup, for instance, which might not mean much to most people. It's actually really stimmy. It's a little clip from a show with Adam Driver, which I didn't even know any of this. I looked into it when I found out how much I love this little phrase, which is good soup. And it's just Adam Driver saying good soup in this really lovely way. And I love it. And I've just been stimming with it. And I had spaghetti hoops this morning. So I was going, good hoops. And, and things like this. So these sorts of things are and can be mindful and relaxing. So, yeah. So let's talk about mindful stimming then. So why is mindfulness, or can mindfulness be a problem for us? So obviously, you've mentioned a few things there, Monique. I've mentioned, obviously, if you don't think in pictures, if you're ADHD and your brain is going all over the shop and you can't get it to be quiet anyway, it can feel very frustrating. Any other thoughts on why mindfulness doesn't work for us?
I think
oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I think if you've got the wrong concept of what you're looking for, so if someone's telling you this is how to do mindfulness and you have to stop and you have to take in everything that's around you, I think sometimes it's the environment that's overwhelming us, and the last thing we need to do is kind of take in any more of the things that are currently overwhelming us, and the priority should still be for us to get into a safe environment and then practice some kind of mindfulness that's actually centered on allowing us to feel the right things. But like I say, if it's in the middle of a difficult situation, you know, if you're going into meltdown, mindfulness is not the thing that's going to get you out of it at the time.
I think a lot of autistic people experience a lot of anxiety more than neurotypical people. So we're more than likely to have more racing thoughts. And I mean, ultimately, mindfulness is an impossible task. And I think that's one thing that people forget, that actually human beings think, and we think all the time. And, you know, there's certain people in supposedly, you know, Buddha supposedly is the most mindful person in the world or whatever. But I think, it is an impossible task, and it's very difficult to do. And it's something that takes a lot of practice. And a lot of us beat ourselves up. So as soon as we start thinking, we think, I'm doing it wrong, I'm not doing it right, I'm not, and then it just kind of completely gets out of control. And that's, that's not what it's about at all. And a lot of people just find it almost impossible to not think. And I think ultimately it is an impossible task.
Yeah. So talk to us then, Annette, about mindful stimming and how this came about.
Yeah, so we kind of thought that actually a lot of people expressed, especially in the workshops, the idea of mindfulness just being almost more anxiety creating than it is relaxing. And I think because of all the stuff that we did with stimming, and because of the kind of discovery that there's, happy stimming, and that we can teach ourselves to stim in a way that's positive, and actually and a lot of times it will alleviate our anxiety or stop ourselves from harmful stimming, maybe we could do something that's called mindful stimming, which is basically just stimming and paying attention to the object that you're looking at because you're interested in it. And, to autistic people that like to stim, it can be all consuming, and it does that same thing of what you were talking about, Monique, that you just forget where you are, and you forget, you don't hear people speaking to you, and you really get into something. But once again, if you don't do this on a regular basis, it can be hard. So don't be kind to yourself. We are going to try a little 5-minute mindful stim, but there's no right or wrong way to do this. And, if it's not working for you, that's totally fine too. It's all about you just trying to find something that you enjoy, and doing that and doing that to kind of regulate your sensory experience.
Yeah, and I think that's quite important as well, that if this doesn't work for you, it is okay. There will be something, if it is gaming, if it is whatever it might be. I've just seen Victoria talking about reading academic journal articles or government policy, which really distracts them from their spiraling thoughts. So whatever it is, if it works for you, it's working. Okay. So, but we have found for some people who've really struggled to ever get their minds to be even remotely what we would class as quiet, not silent, but quiet. We've had some good results with that, haven't you, Annette? So a couple of people who have said, I've never had my mind be quiet. That is the first thing that I found, which was us demonstrating the mindful stimming that they found. And at sometimes it meant they fell asleep as well. And that's how relaxed they were. So for some people, this might be really what you were looking for. So trying different things. So we are going to finish on that mindful stim. So what I will say, because hopefully people will be nice and calm and relaxed at the end of it. So we will say goodbye now, and then we will do the mindful stim. So it's kind of like, thank you everyone for being here. We will see you, like say, next week, and we're now going to finish with Annette's mindful stim. So I'm going to put myself on mute as well, so just make sure there's no background noise coming in.
Okay, so everybody get an object that you like. It could be anything. It could be a ring. It could be a hairband. I mean, it could be something visual if you like visual stimming. It could be something tactile if you like tactile stimming. Whatever it is that you know, anything. It could be anything, but an object. Or if you enjoy just stimming, particular like with your body, do that as well. It doesn't matter what you use. It could be a stone. It could be anything. So if you just get your object that you like the look of, and what I want you to do is consider a few things about the object. And what I want you to think about as well is to remember what it's like to be a child and play. Playing is something that all human beings do as children, and then usually for some reason are told at some point that you're too old to play. I became an artist to learn how to play again and to remember my fascination with the sensory world and to enjoy life, to notice things most people just don't see anymore, and to kind of be in the present moment. And I think we know how to do that as children, and we kind of are, it's beaten out of us. Um, it's just not acceptable to play. And I think we have to allow ourselves to play again and be stimmy and play with things. Once again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. If your mind wanders, that's okay. The purpose of this exercise is for you to get lost in the wonder of objects and sensation again, and be kind of remembering the things that you really enjoyed as a kid. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at your object. I want you to place it in your hand. And I want you to notice the weight of your object. Is it heavy or is it light? Is it cold or is it warm? Does it have movement to it or is it quite still? How does it feel in your hand? Is it is it hard or is it soft? And you can kind of rub it on your hand. You can kind of rub it on the outside of your hand. And how does that feel? And then try rubbing it on the inside of your hand and notice that there's a difference between that. And kind of notice the sensation that you're getting from that object. Hold your object up to the light. Yeah. Does it look different? Kind of turn it around, looking at it through the light. Is it opaque? Or is it shiny? Do you see kind of the light through it? And then does it sparkle or look different when it's looking at the light? And now I want you to remember, and remember it's okay if your mind wanders, just to bring your attention back to your object. You're not doing this wrong. There's no one way to do this. It's just about being present and playing. So what does your object look like? Are there things about it that you didn't notice before? If you were an alien from another planet, what would you think your object was for? Would it have a different use than what you think it is useful for now? What can you do with your object? Does it have moving parts? Can it spin? Can it change shape? And everybody's going to have different reactions to this. Does it smell? And now I just want you to kind of play with your object, see if you can move it in different ways. And if you're not liking your object, you could switch to something else. And then when you get a movement that you really like to do, just take a few minutes, 2 moments, and just do that movement. And just get into it. It might be that you like the way your object looks when you move it. Or it might be that your object makes a sound that you like. Or you might like the feel of your object when it moves. Whatever it is, just really just have a play, explore, and enjoy. And it is really good to kind of think about what you used to like as a child, what you used to like to look at and play with. And if you want to try something else with your object, you found a new movement that you like, try that. If your mind wanders, just bring it back to your object. Change your stim object. I'm just going to get you to think and kind of come back now. Come out of the stim world, which is sometimes quite hard. And slowly do it. Or you don't have to. You can continue to stim if you want to. And we'll come back. And hopefully people are relaxed.
Thanks, everybody. See everybody next week. Gonna have our nice twangly music now to take you out.